Hey there, welcome back to Roz Nights, squeezing the quo. Good to see you. Good to have you back. I'm just a little giddy here. And if you watched my Roz's rant, my first one last night, you saw that I was snooping in the United States Department of Justice about looking more about the article of clothing, the personal belongings, how that all works during an active investigation. The only thing I could find was when the investigation is done, when the case is closed, the trial is done. Then you can get your stuff back. And it's quite the process, and it's long, and it's drawn out, and it's difficult for people to get their shit back. Well, today I did go back, and I found this guy, this little gem. Forensic genealogical DNA analysis and searching. And guess what happened today with Bryan Kohberger of the Idaho4 mass murder case? FBI has to show their work, is what my understanding is, by December 1st. So I'm a little giddy. I'm just going to read one little section here, and I'm going to put it in my description so that you can read it on your own if you like. But I'm going to do little sections here, and I'm going to just focus on one aspect. Okay? And it's because of my medical background, and it jumped out at me. United States Department of Justice interim policy, forensic genealogical DNA analysis and searching. Okay? And this was approved September 1st, 2019, and is effective November 1st, 2019. So, the purpose and scope. The purpose of this interim policy is to promote the reasoned exercise of investigative, scientific, and prosecutorial discretion in cases that involve forensic genetics, genealogical DNA analysis and searching, FGGS. It provides guidance to department agencies when formulating a thoughtful and collaborative approach to important interdisciplinary decisions in cases that utilize this investigative technique. Collaboration between investigators, laboratory personnel, and prosecutors is important because the decision to pursue FGGS may affect privacy interests, the consumption of forensic samples, and law enforcement's ability to solve violent crime. Beautiful. So we're focusing on just one thing right here. Consumption of forensic samples. And right here, the privacy interest will go a little bit further as well. But that's been Bill's go-to. Privacy. I'm just following the guidelines of the Department of Justice on the FGG. I'm just following their guidelines. The privacy. That's what he's been honing in on. And we will get into that. But I want to look at just this, the forensic samples. Okay? But real quick, investigative collaboration. If each of the criteria set forth in Section 5 has been satisfied, the investigative agency shall contact a designated official at the CODIS laboratory, designated laboratory official, or DLO, that uploaded the forensic profile to CODIS. So with Bryan Kohberger, because he is a suspect of this 4, he's in custody and he's been charged, his DNA has been put into CODIS. And then from there, they can build upon. They have like a baseline. They have his information, they have a baseline. Okay? So they have to put it in CODIS. And the DLO must determine if the candidate forensic sample is from a single source contributor or is a deduced mixture, meaning there's more than one other sample inside of it. Some other person's DNA is also within that forensic sample. And the sample we're talking about here is the belt buckle DNA sample that is on the sheath. Okay? The DLO will also assess the candidate's forensic sample suitability, quantity, quality, degradation, mixture status, etc. For FGG, it advised the investigative agency about the results of that evaluation. In addition, the DLO may advise the investigative agency for any reasonable scientific alternatives to FGGS, given the nature and condition of the candidate forensic sample and the availability of other DNA technologies or techniques. The investigative agency shall document its consultation with the DLO. Okay, so we need to see that consultation. I mean, not right now, but just that's part of the standard procedure, the standard guidelines. After consulting with the DLO, the investigative agency shall contact the prosecutor. The investigative agency shall advise the prosecutor of the nature and status of the investigation, the results of the DLO's evaluation, and the candidate forensic sample, and any reasonable scientific alternatives to FGGS provided by the DLO. After discussing these issues and based on the information provided, the prosecutor and the investigative agency must agree that the candidate forensic sample is suitable for FGG, and that FGGS is a necessary and appropriate step at the stage of the investigation to develop investigative leads or to identify the unidentified human remains. So this is only used as for a lead, not so much for an arrest, which we'll get into, not in this video, but as a lead. So the sample. And here is just evaluation of forensic DNA mixture evidence, the protocol for it, when they're saying deduced, it's 2 or more contributing factors to that profile, so they have to separate them. So we're talking about a little sample that's on a belt buckle. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, guess what? It took them hours and hours before Dylan even called over for authorities. And then it took hours and hours before the authorities got to the site. And then I'm sure it's hours and hours before forensics can come in and get their samples. And even when they get their samples, did they even do that correctly on the belt buckle? So if it's blood, well, blood has a natural metal in it. And if that blood, which is iron, and whatever type of metal that belt buckle is it nickel? Is it gold? Is it brass? Is it copper? That is going to affect the integrity of the sample. Okay? And as I've mentioned, I have done many phlebotomy and have drawn lab samples. And even that, when you're there, professionals that do it over and over again, over years, which I got very good at it, and of course I had some valleys, but guess what? There's something called the blood sample hemolyzed, so we can't use it, and then we have to redraw it because here. Resulting from phlebotomy may be caused by incorrect needle size, improper tube mixing, incorrect filling of tubes, excessive suction, prolonged tourniquet, and difficult collection. All those variables cause that blood sample that we get to be hemolyzed, and then we can't use it at all. You have to redraw it. Sometimes, depending on the test that is needed, they are able to do just one aspect of it, but not all of it. But mostly if it's hemolyzed, they say redraw it because there's more than one type of test that is involved with that specific colored top. Okay, so now and that's just from human right down to the lab, a few feet away, just an elevator shot down away. So now we're getting a sample off a belt buckle that's been exposed to the elements for hours and hours and hours. The integrity of that sample is going to be compromised. It's going to be fragile. And that little belt buckle, if you listen to Truth and Transparency with Ms. Vargas, they treat those samples, those forensic samples, like gold because it's so difficult. The integrity of the sample. It is not that easy as it, they're making it sound that it's like so easy. It's just easy to do. It's just easy. And here I found the National Institute of Justice, the DNA evidence basics, types of samples suitable for DNA testing. Definitely, it's any biological sample, including liquid blood or blood stains, saliva stains, semen, dried semen stains. The samples are collected on swabs or gauze or as aspirates. And let's see here. Use of samples from relatives for testing. It says here for a child inherits half the DNA from each parent. It is possible to use reference samples collected from close relatives, such as a biological father, mother, and or full siblings, or the individual's spouse and their children, to identify or confirm the identity of bodies that have not been identified through other means. It is also possible to use reference samples collected from close relatives for comparison to crime scene samples. For example, in missing body cases where a blood stain or a tissue sample from a possible crime scene can be tested to demonstrate a biological relationship to known individuals. So with that being said, if they can use reference samples, which I'm assuming that's why they went to Pennsylvania to get DNA samples from the trash from the family, they can use that as a reference sample to help. Yeah, that's Brian's dad. As for the genetic genealogy, it's a little bit more complicated, and we'll get into that, but I just wanted to bring that up. Okay, because that's what they said. Octillion. Okay. And let me just go back to this real quick. Oops. Let me just do the investigation caution real quick. Investigative agencies shall identify themselves as law enforcement to GG services and enter and search FGG profiles only in those GG services that provide explicit notice to their service users and the public that law enforcement may use their service sites to investigate crimes or to identify unidentified human remains. So this is what they're talking about. When you do the DNA profiles, you can click yes or no to either or. Okay? Investigative agencies shall use biological samples in FGG profiles only for law enforcement identification purposes and shall take all reasonable and necessary steps and precautions to ensure that same limited use by others who have authorized access to those samples and profiles. Biological samples in FGG profiles shall not be used by investigative agencies, vendor laboratories, GG services, or others to determine the sample donor's genetic predispositions for disease or any other medical condition or psychological trait, which is not, we're not using that here for this particular reason, but it's good to know that that's there. An FGGS is a law enforcement technique used to generate investigative leads. Investigative agencies shall not arrest a suspect based solely on a genetic association generated by a GG service. Traditional genealogical research and other investigative work is required to determine the true nature of any genetic association. Right there. FGGS is a law enforcement technique used to generate investigative leads. Investigative agencies shall not arrest a suspect based solely on a genetic association generated by a GG service. Traditional genealogical research and other investigative work is required to determine the true nature of any genetic association. There you go. So they're going to need more sample sizes, they're going to need more investigative work. And what have we learned so far? They have the wrong car. Okay, they have the wrong car. We've got the pings. Okay, but even that is iffy. And what else? We have apparently surveillance, but we have not seen any of that surveillance. All we do know is that they are saying that the reason why he is the suspect is because of the FGGS. But as we just saw here, and if I'm reading this correctly, let me know if I am or if I am not. And I have just jumped around a little bit, but FGGS is a law enforcement technique used to generate investigative leads. Okay. Investigative agencies shall not arrest a suspect based solely on a genetic association generated by a GG service. Traditional genealogy research and other investigative work is required to determine the true nature of any genetic association. So they need more work to show that genetic association. They have to build more of a case when you use this avenue. And is this why they're saying they're not using this anymore? They're throwing that away. So, now, I'm going to leave it there because there's a lot more to go through. So now we are to the point where FBI has to show us how they got to this. How do they generate the investigative lead to Brian Koberger that they needed to go and generate a GG service? How was that done? And why was that done? What was the sample that was used? How much of the sample that was used? In order for that to even happen, for that to happen, you have to have a decent sample on that belt buckle that they said they got the original sample from, that they say that is the person who did this. Let me know what you think in the comments and hit that notification bell, subscribe, like, you know the dealio. Until then, good nights.